Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Howdy how, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Zac here with my good bud Clint. How you doing, dude?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. It's been a very busy, hectic past few days. I mean, the whole weekend. It's one of those where I didn't get a day off this weekend, so I'm feeling it because I had a full Monday I still came back to. So
yeah. You had that last weekend. I'm going to have that this weekend. So why don't you tell everybody where you were this weekend? Because
I had a fantastic show. So, I do the Midwest Reptile Show regularly there in Indianapolis. And Brian, the showrunner, had put together this 2-day show. And it's in the same area, different building, but the same venue. It's, the state fairgrounds there. And I'll be honest, going into it, my thoughts were, okay, we're going to pay more money, for the booths and whatnot, because it's this 2-day show, but is it really going to be different? There's already a regular show here. It's his regular show. Yeah. It's not monthly or anything, but it's regular enough that I'm like, how's it going to be different? But I'm going to tell you what, I was wrong in that thought process. And, so I give some big kudos to Brian on this because one, he timed it with a oddities expo that was right across the parking lot. And I mean, nice. Oddities, reptiles, yeah.
They marry together well.
Yes. So he, he timed that. He did a lot of marketing, billboards all over the place, really pumped it up. But what I was really surprised is when I got there to set up, I get there Friday because it's like, you know what? We're going to bring it. We had 2 booths, which were basically like giving us 20 feet by 10 feet of space. Half of our booth was ReptiChip because ReptiChip was sponsoring. Yep. We've got such a great relationship. We're up there taking care and bringing a load of ReptiChip product. And we really wanted to have a presence. And we had just the pristine premium spot. You walk in and you just see Metazotics, and I loved it. Was so grateful for that. So I walked around after I got set up, and this was before a lot of other vendors were there yet, and they just had the signs with their names on, the booth, so you knew who was there.
Yeah.
And I was just floored, one, by how big it was, how many vendors there were. And I mean, there's like Josh's Frogs, Vision Cages. I mean, there's just, a lot of breeders that I know. And it was like, this is okay. Let's see what happens here. And sure enough, I think there ended up being somewhere around 6,500 people through the door over the weekend. And we were slammed the entire time. We ended up, we did Tinley business, out. It was incredible. So yeah, it was dynamite. And that's where I was and exhausted, but I have more things that I'll get to talk about on that, with the market update that came about. So it's cool stuff.
No, so you were out all last weekend. This weekend, I was at home dealing with surprise clutches. So I've already have eggs on the ground. I had the Madagascar hognose snake, which I infamously talked about twice. You don't know this yet, but we got our first clutch of hognose snake eggs.
Hey!
Yeah. I was looking at this female. It was the one that had the funk on her face. Mm-hmm. She then shed out all that happy gunk and then refused the mouse. And I thought, okay, something's up. And she looked a little chunky in the back. And then sure enough, she was deflated. And I was like, you son of a bee. And then lifted up her hide box. And there are all these, they look like dehydrated grapes because I was not ready for it because it was really early for a hog clutch which came out of brumation. But I used my trick, ReptiChip. We've already talked about ReptiChip twice. So there's a reason that we love them as our sponsor. Yeah. I just stuck them all down in really wet Repti chip for a day and a half, and then boom, they look like totally normal hognose snake eggs. So
nice.
So we got that clutch on the ground. And then a new one for me, though it technically isn't my animal, it's the university's animal, which also totally threw me for a loop. I was, I can't remember if this was Thursday or Friday of last week. And my animal care staff member, Lauren Mort, came down to me and said, "Did you see the message from Bjorn? He's one of my grad students." And I was like, "No." And he's like, "The Northern Pine's laying eggs." I was like, "What? Like, how the hell is that even possible?" I was like, so anyway, went up. Sure enough, we got 7 perfect eggs. So
nice.
No one saw them lock, but I'm talking that guy got his business done in like the first 15 minutes they were put together. If we already got eggs on the ground, because that female, she was a virgin. She wasn't with any other snakes. So that's really cool.
Cool.
So the first pitch ophis eggs are on the ground. And then I have a pair of Kentucky pines that they're mine, but I donated them to the school and went and checked on those because they said the female's looking thick. Those are the most aggressive, I say defensive snakes we have in our entire snake collection. So I can't tell if she's gravid or she's just full of air, literally being a very angry pitch ophis. But also looks like we're going to have loading eye too, black pines. So
awesome.
So pitch ophis, we're kind of knocking it out of the park, which is important because we need those babies for Bjorn's thesis, which is looking at the metabolic rates of indigo snakes. But I needed other large colubrids at different life stages to see if they're any different, because we don't know if they are or aren't. So that's kind of fun. And then first clutch of false water cobras. That I think that happened in between. Yeah, that happened on Easter. And then I have 3 here that are ready to blow. They've all done their prelay sheds. And I was like doing the timing, and you might know this if you listen. Some of the people definitely know that listen because we're going to be with them. But I was like, blank. Because it looks like I'm going to probably get about 50 falsy eggs while I am in California. I was like, so I've already informed my son, listen, every clutch you set up in the incubator perfectly, you're getting $25. So I have to incentivize this because he is 16, and like most 16-year-olds, he's got his interests, but like attention span of a gnat. And so we went over how to set him up. You know, I've drilled him now a couple times, so we'll see. And a lot of king snakes are gravid, so it looks like we're off to the races with the season here. So
I'm going to make a quick disclaimer. Corey, who works in our nursery, you will not get $25 a clutch that you set up because I can't afford that.
Yeah, but I think you should push him on that, Corey.
It's a lot of clutches.
I'm looking at like maybe 8, and I figure it's worth it, you know. So anyway, so yeah, that's the thing. And then the biggie, of course, in my universe is this is what we call dead week at the university. This is the week before finals week. This is the week that everybody loses their mind. And it is Monday when we are recording this, and they are already losing their minds. So I dealt with like so much crying today. There were so many tears. But you know, I had to inform some of them. It's okay. I had to inform some of them. It's probably not going to be okay.
It's better luck next year.
Yeah. So anyway, so we shall see. But this week, I don't get the weekend off because I am heading back to Iowa, and the project, it's ripping now. I live vicariously through Tyler and Paige and Alyssa and whichever undergrad we've sent out there, and Don and Jim and Josh. Today they caught a beautiful, massive bull snake on the crawl. We're getting all kinds of crazy, like just amazing observations with the Western hogs coming up out of the ground from hibernation, which has been super cool. It's really weird how my 2 research focuses, crayfish and snakes. You would think they would not be related, but I do a lot of burrowing crayfish biology, and a lot of that involves like basically measuring and getting data on something under the ground, the burrow. And so we have some ideas on maybe getting some really cool data on burrows, because one of my graduate students right now, we took Platt, the 1969 book, and we found out that Platt found that the hogs burrow like 15 inches. So we bought her a bunch of big Rubbermaid tubs that are 2 feet tall, and we filled them up with this aspen mix. And then we're seeing, like, will they burrow and how far will they burrow? And is that a part of their husbandry we're denying them that we don't think about? And it's been really cool because Kelly goes in after dark when they burrow, and those little boogers are like, in a matter of half an hour, digging 20 inches, like down to the bottom, and that's where they're hanging out. And then during the day, the lights come on. I don't know how the hell they see these lights because we've got the tubs all blacked out. And then they come right up to the surface like the worms from Dune. So yeah, lots of good stuff. But I want this semester. I love this semester. It's a good one. Taught that biology of snake class. I am ready for it to go away. I am ready to become field biologist Zac for the next 2.5 months. And so, yep, that's where we're at. But anywho.
Very nice.
So with our updates out of the way, I have a paper, and I am looking at all of you Getula haters. Nasarge. So anyway, it is, I can't wait to present this paper, but I want to save that for last. Can you do your market update? Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as market update, we're not going to go over numbers. That's going to be on the next episode because that gives us our monthly ending data. But instead, I'm going to talk about a couple things. First, just briefly, trends on what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling. The local market, we hit a little bit of a lull for a small amount of time, but it's suddenly, like, in just the past few days, popped back up. And I kind of feel that's probably due to saturation of the reptile shows in my immediate area. I mean, not only is the local show now monthly, but on top of the monthly show here in Evansville, within an hour, there's like 3 other shows. I mean, that happen. So there's at least 2 shows in a month that, within an hour drive. So I just think we're kind of getting a little too saturated. And so I'll see some of that at times. But we also have seen a little bit of a shift when it comes to, the tax money has dried up. So even online slowed a little bit. But this past week, online sales started to pop again.
Nice.
And it's, I realize it, but I don't always realize it until Steve sometimes says, okay, we're shipping out a lot of snakes, this month or this week. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It did pop back up. So that was good. And that's not with an incredible amount of new snakes being added, So I think that, there's probably others who are kind of seeing the same thing where we know this is the time of year where everyone's inventory is very, very low. But if you get the individuals who are still hungry for something, then, that's when some of the stuff you may have been sitting on for a while suddenly, gets rejuvenated and is out the door. So that was neat. I told you, mentioned the show, obviously, just a few minutes ago, and people came and ready to buy. Now, I was in a lucky position, not just from where we were stationed in that show, but it was definitely still a very heavy ball python show. And I don't know how well everyone was doing with those. But it was real light on colubrids. There were obviously hognose, out there. I would see those. I can only and you'd see it, this or that sprinkled, here or there. There was one other table by one of our listeners, Kyle, that had some nice Leonis, and he's a Montane King fan, like myself, Dr. Loughman. So he
talk about him shortly.
he had some nice stuff, and I know that he's done well, but so we really didn't have a whole lot of colubrid representation, which means, it certainly benefits us. But what our bearded dragons, Cresties, flew off the table.
Really?
And there weren't many bearded dragons because I think it's still early in the season. We're lucky that we had some available already. But Now, I think our Cresties were flying off the table because we were
I saw
including
that.
them. Yeah, if you buy an arboreal cage, you get a free Cresty, and so boom, 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 boom. I should have
Mhm.
brought. There's times I'll take those arboreal cages to a show. I'll only take 4, and I'm ticked off because I'm bringing all 4 of them home, and it's just that much space, for me to
Mhm.
have to load. Well, we brought like 8, and I should have brought a dozen more because they were just going. So it was really, really cool. And that, I mean, kind of goes to show that there's still, the market's there, it's just having what people want in a way that they want. While, yes, we all love to be able to buy so much in this world online and just having it shipped directly to our door, when it comes to animals, we still want to be able to get out, walk around, see,
Yeah.
so the shows aren't going anywhere. There's a reason that more and more keep popping up, even if it's when there's too many, it's to the detriment of the vendors more than anything else. So, um, but now what I want to talk about is 2 other things I'm excited about. First, our guest tonight, Dr. Whitman, was a speaker at the first ever Colubrid Fest. And I mean, his talk was one of the popular ones. It was one that, certainly got a lot of buzz about it. And it was, on egg binding. And during this, I think the most memorable piece for everyone out of that entire talk that was just packed with information was the nest boxes and how we all use clear or at best opaque nest boxes, and absolutely all most of us do have for years and years. And while yes, we can say that do they work? Yeah, they work. But the whole point of what we try to push on our show here is just because it works doesn't mean there's not a better way. And
Mhm.
to Dr. Whitman's point, snakes aren't laying their eggs out in the open. When this is happening, they're in these pitch black places that gives them more security, reduces the stress on the female, and lessens the likelihood, of egg binding. So we, as I mentioned on the last episode, um, had a discussion with Andrew, local friend here, who was at Clubber Fest, heard the talk, and with his engineering skills, he has designed we can call it the Whitman box.
The
Uh,
Whitman box.
the
I
Whitman
like
box. He
that.
has designed that, and we got it. We had some produced, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to throw them out there and let's gauge interest. Well, the interest has been gauged, and it is huge. I mean, we sold out very quickly. And I've got orders for 15, 40. I mean, and I have to tell, okay, give me a week. We'll have to get more
Yeah.
product put together here and be able to get shipped out. We had boxes stacked up as tall as I am this morning of online orders of these to go out, that were packaged and ready to ship. So now if you are on YouTube, you actually can see these. Max has the Metazotics website pulled up, and basically, the cool thing about it is if you're looking at it, you'll notice the entrance. The entrance is down at the bottom, and the snake enters from the ground and goes up. So it's not a straight level hole like all of us who have cut out a hole out of our Sterilite containers or sandwich
Mhm.
containers or whatever it is we're using. It's still low, so they run into it cruising on the ground, but then they come up and there's this lip right there against that entrance where when you put all of your, um, in my case, Repti Earth, in there as your bedding, and then you can kind of top it with sphagnum moss if you want to. But the great thing is the snake goes in there and wallers around and does whatever it's going to do. It's not knocking all of that out and all over the rest of the cage. It's not dragging aspen or anything else in. So it's nice. It holds that. And then, of course, it's pitched black, other than the light that comes in from the entrance. And I think that's just great. It's holding humidity. And then if you want to click to, yeah, there you go. And we still may refine this a little bit more. Um, the lid It's got a lip in the back, or actually the actual nest box has a lip in the back that the lid kind of just, it goes into this inserted area in the lid. And then the front, while it latches down, it's a light latch. And so we're still kind of figuring out, because the first round, it was, I don't want to say it was hard, but my thought is if these are in a rack, typically you are wanting to pull the rack open and be able to lift this with one hand. So it's got to be
Yep.
very easy to undo. You want to be able to lift it with one hand to check eggs, so you're not banging it around, moving it around to try to open it. Like right now, when we have our nest boxes with, you're having to pop it open to look in there. With this, it's easy, but still latches enough that the snake's not popping the lid off, when it's inside. So yeah, these are out. We will have more as they come in, but I think like 10 people come up to me at the Indianapolis show and ask, "Do you have those new nest boxes with you?" Like I wish, I mean, because they were definitely a hit, and we will certainly ensure we have enough ready to go out at Klurid Fest, and we'll be bringing those with us. So, and again, it's fun to have a product that's selling from a business standpoint, but again, super excited to watch this come from hearing a talk at Klurid Fest. And now it's manifest into boom. There's that product right there on the website, so
that's what we wanted our show to do.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, now I want to talk about another product that I just became aware of. And it's funny because we've talked about this on the show on how it would be neat if this could be done. And there's a company now flirting with it, and doing it. So during the 2-day show this weekend, I was lucky enough to get invited to go out to Top Golf with Brian Hahn from ARS Caging, who he's the one who puts on the Indianapolis show, and with several of the sponsors, for that particular show. One of the sponsors was Vision Caging, Vision Racks and Vision Caging. And I got to talk to these guys, Mike and Mike, and we're now establishing a nice relationship, and so Metazotics will be able to work with some Vision product and have that available for our customers. But what really, really caught my attention through our conversations and with what they have there, Vision actually has rack systems that you can heat with a light and put UVB on. Now, I was like, okay, how does this look? How does this work? And if you're familiar with Vision racks, you kind of know how they're spaced and how that, it's those poles that separate how high, that the space for the tubs is going to be. Well, it's pretty much kind of like, in between there. So it has a metal like grate, I guess we'd call it, as the top. So it's almost like a screen vent. It's harder and firmer than screen, obviously, but it's kind of a screened, top that the tub slides under. So it's fully ventilated, and your lights go directly on top of that. And you can space it for either low profile, or you can space it if you need a dome for heat. Now, right now, there's going to be some kind of pieces to play with, because they're manufacturing deeper tubs to go in these. But right now, the tubs are kind of your standard tubs, so they're not incredibly tall.
The CB70?
You can do, like that. What I'm working with and playing with are like the 23 quart.
Okay.
So it's, it fits where a CB70 would, but it's two of them, and that. So, because my thought was, I would love to have racks like this for baby bearded dragons. Because right now what we have is we have a like literal rack, like shelves, and we have our large totes, 3 of them on a shelf, strip lighting for our UV, heat lights, are clamped on, and these tubs are wide open, and they take up a lot of space. And it's not that I want smaller tubs. It's all the space that you lose because
you want organized space.
Right, exactly. The racks aren't designed for what you're doing, so you have extra space and width that you don't necessarily need. So we, Metazotics, is now the owner of 2 of these racks. Because we're going to play with the different sizes, different, because you can adjust it however you really want to. But the one caveat with this being new, and with it being with these tubs not having the space that we're typically putting UV on, we're going to have to do some tests with our UV meters and whatnot to determine what's the appropriate UVB light to put on such a short distance.
Sure.
Whether that, if it's a bearded dragon that we would normally be putting 12 or 14% on, is 6 right? Or is that too much even? Do we need to do something different there? So we're going to be playing with that. And obviously we'll talk more about it on the show as we figure some of it out. But I thought it was a really cool product. Even if it's not perfected for what we want yet, it continues to show that progression.
It's pretty badass.
Yeah. And I mean, we've always said one of the things that, tubs are lacking is that ability for that, kind of natural lighting. And this is a step in that direction for sure. And it's, to my knowledge, the only thing like this on the market yet. So
yeah, I've had people reach out to me that were like Andrew, literal engineers that can make a design on a computer and then make it happen in reality, showing me like how they were going to do it and everything, which is super cool. But I've not heard of any of the bigger companies actually doing it. I spoke with a couple of the larger companies for kind of the more professional looking racks a couple years ago, and there was like just no interest all in doing that.
Well, and I think
that one of the larger companies is at least giving it a go.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of, if we just think about the evolution of the hobby over the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, then I think 10 years ago, talking about UVB and racks, it's like, why? But this has really become a conversation, really, in probably the last 2 to 3 years, where it's really, really started to, take off for the animals that are frequently kept in racks. Is UVB something we should be looking at? And I think as that conversation grows, then once a market exists, that there's people who are interested in that. That's when the big boys come out to play, and it makes, because it has to make sense for a company to invest in the time to design it, the material, the cost to manufacture it, the cost to advertise it. And, if all that doesn't, equate to a market that's really, hungry for it, then, it's a lot of waste of money. So I thought it was cool. And I look forward to being able to see what we can do with them and reporting back on it.
Cool. All right. Good stuff.
So tell us all that is Getula.
Well, before we do that,
I know you're itching.
Who? Me? No. Before we do that, who sponsors the market update?
Sorry. The market update is sponsored by Show Me Reptiles. Sorry, Mickey. I was so excited about this product, man. I just went on a tangent. Forgive me, brother. Yeah, the Show Me Marketplace, Show Me Reptiles, obviously. They're ones who are putting out some killer shows. Actually, I did have, I want to say like 2 or 3 people were talking about some of the Show Me shows that they had recently done and the success that they were having. And I think what sparked those conversations were we had several people walking around in Colubrid Fest shirts.
Yeah.
And so that was exciting. And so they were talking, like one of the guys said that he was down in North Carolina doing a Show Me show, and he goes, and I saw 2 Colubrid Fest shirts walk by. And so it's just, it's amazing that he keeps seeing those out there. So yeah, keep up what you're doing. Loving it.
Excellent. All right. Now let's talk some Getula. So science update brought to us by Rare Genetics, Inc. Kaylin, Ben, and company, as always, doing wonderful, wonderful things. Please keep sending them those shed skins. I'm going to keep saying this because, once again, the glory of CCR and Colubrid Fest, we kind of launched the effort to get the skins. Then they got the skins. And now we have Colubrid-centric genetic testing, and our community is going to drive the possibility for even more tests. So if you're interested in contributing specifically with some of the more popular species like hognose snakes, corn snakes, Cali kings, bulls, pines, all that good stuff, go to their website. They have the protocol online. You can read it there, and you can also reach out to Ben and Kayla and RGI directly on social media. So please do that. All right. So I have some thoughts on the last episode. So the first is I want to call out Max, because we were all done. Everything was gravy. And then he had to choose the question, what snakes do you think are overrated? And I feel like this was a trap for me, because I have been put in this corner due to threatening actions by the one and only Nastarj, who perpetually, and I hope I'm saying your name right, dude, perpetually is crapping on my Getula Kings and forcing me to defend their honor. And so when I was asked what snake's overrated, I literally sat here and thought, this is going to be fun, and threw out their Mountain King snakes. And what y'all don't know is you Mountain King snake peeps are loyal, because I had not one, not two, not three, I checked it, not four, not five, but 6 of you reach out to me and essentially say, you're wrong. What the hell is wrong with you? How could you possibly think this way? When I said that Mountain King snakes may be a little overrated. So then I asked Clint, how many hognose snake people reached out to you? Hognose snake peeps, where the hell you at, man? Because his response was what, Clint?
Nah.
None.
I think
zero.
You? I mean,
that's me. I was it. So how the hell can we sit and listen to the market update every single freaking month and find out hognose snakes are taking over the market? Where the hell are you? So where my peeps at is what I'm trying to say. So anyway,
I'm not gonna lie, I thought I was going to get flamed for that one. It's like, I'm taking the biggest colubrid, as far as popularity, and I'm going to be like, maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah. So anyway, I do want to say one thing. I like Mountain King snakes. Please don't think I don't like Mountain King snakes. And I actually have 2.2 Leonis and 1.1 Alterna. My Alterna are Blair phase. They're generic. They have no locality data. Someone once told me when I said they had no locality data, the response I got was, oh, they're fake Alterna. I was like, what the hell does that even mean? So anyway, but I like them. I just said that they might be a little bit overrated. But there's this perpetual debate that I have now been sucked into unwillingly, but will continue to do, that Getula deserves more respect within the lamp community than it gets. And today's paper is proof of that. So I'm going out on a limb saying proof of that is about to enter the stage. So here we go. Because the title of this paper is The King of Snakes, Performance and Morphology of Intraguild Predators, Lampripeltis, and their prey, Pantherophis. So now I've decided that my Getula Kings truly need some love and respect. And so this is a paper that came out. It got a little clickbaity when it came out, but it's still a really good paper in 2017. And I'll blow this up for the people on YouTube, but if you're riding in your car, I'll explain. Here's the abstract. Basically, what has been done with snakes is you can use these things called force transducers, which literally measure the pressure that an entity applies to the force conducer. And with constriction, there was this idea that snakes, when they will constrict, I taught this a million times when I went out and did library talks back in the day. The prey item breathes out, the constricting snake constricts a little bit, the prey item breathes out, the constriction snake squeezes a little bit, and they do this until the lungs are deflated. And the lungs are deflated, they can't inflate their lungs, they can't get oxygen. That's how they kill their prey if they're a constricting snake. And ironically, when I would do this, I would be talking primarily about, we'll go back to the title, Pantherophis because I usually was holding a black rat snake when I was telling the masses about the goodness of this. Well, the authors in this paper wanted to see within these two dominant genera of large constricting snakes, Pitchophis are the only ones that get bigger in North America. Were they equal ecologically and biologically, or was one stronger than the other? And so the species of snakes that they used, and you know, for those of you who don't like the splitting up of Getula into species, you're probably not going to be the biggest fans of this. And I'm sorry if I'm making you puke scrolling through the paper. But we have Lampropeltis getula, which is the eastern king snake for them. Lampropeltis holbrooki, which is the speckled king snake. And then Lampropeltis californiae, which is the Cali king. So they basically, instead of looking at those as subspecies, they looked at them as species. And then it's on here. They also looked at Pantherophis. So Clint's guys, Pantherophis alleghaniensis, Pantherophis obsoletus, and of course the corn snake, Pantherophis guttatus. And so what they did is they basically took these, they looked at these snakes beforehand and they asked the question, is there something about these snakes anatomically that might make them one stronger than the other before we look at the force conducers? Because people really hadn't done that. And one thing they did is they went into museums, and here we go. Sorry if you don't like to see donuts of snake tissue, but that's what we're looking at right now. But they took king snakes and rat snakes, here we go, and they dissected them out, and they have cross sections. And so if you take a gander at this, the Lampropeltis getula is on the left-hand side of this if you're looking on YouTube. And sorry if you're driving in your car, but this might be one you want to look up on YouTube. The rat snake is on the right side. And snakes just basically have these kind of rods or columns of muscle that go from their neck down to their cloaca. And so they were able to use imagery software and kind of map those out and look at the overall structure. And one thing that they noticed was that the king snake's muscle tissue was just oriented in a way where it was stronger. So I am saying that the king snakes are stronger than the rat snakes based off of the anatomy. But that doesn't make them the king of snakes. What makes them the king of snakes is their ability to constrict their prey. Okay? And so one thing that they did in this manuscript, which is really cool, is they looked at the behavior of rat snakes versus king snakes when they constrict their prey. And I can say, owning a bunch of Getula kings, if you feed a Florida king a mouse or a rat, first of all, you've got to be ready because it's going to fire out of that tub at warp speed. And then when it grabs the prey, it's this rapid constriction, and they make a column O snake. And what I thought was cool is they use captive snakes in this study. And if we come down here, boom, there's the image. I have seen this a million times. Okay. And what's interesting is the king snakes have these very concentric coils. And then the rat snakes coil, but they don't really coil the same way that the Getula kings do. Now, me being me, I thought that was cool. I never really understood the reason behind it. But after reading this paper, once again, Getula rules the day as far as I'm concerned. That's not an accident, because what they do by this constricting pattern of basically grabbing the prey by the head, creating this little loop, and then getting one coil, next coil, next coil, next coil, is they maximize their constriction, whereas all the other constricting snakes in North America, including the mountain kings, don't. They basically get coils around their prey and they constrict, they kill their prey, but they don't do it the way that the Getula kings do. And this is why the Getula kings will forever be, at least scientifically, the king of kings, because when you measure the force that they are creating, and this is undeniable fact, by the way, they basically constrict with literal orders of magnitude more force than other species of snake. So if you look on the left, if you can see this, there's three blue columns. Doesn't matter what the species of king is. They're all the same. And they are significantly stronger than our Pantherophis pals at like almost 3 times stronger than a corn snake and more than double the strength of a rat snake. And what this does is basically you can take this, you can do some math, and Getula kings are the strongest snakes that have ever been tested per gram of snake. And so what this basically means is they truly are the king of kings when it comes to king snakes and all snakes with constriction. And then the authors go on to explain why. And the reason for this is their constriction strategy is not this simple thing I explained where prey item breathes out, you squeeze a little bit, prey item breathes out, you squeeze a little bit, lungs are deflated. When they do this pine cone of constriction, and they basically give the prey item everything they have, they stop its blood dead. The blood does not move. The heart doesn't move. The lung doesn't move. They actually constrict at a point where there's a possibility they can shut down neurons, and venom is the only thing that normally can do that. And they basically biologically stop their prey item. And when the blood stops, the heart stops, the lung stops, the oxygen, the ability to get oxygen into the blood from the lungs and then throughout the body of the snake, and I say snake because king snakes are eating other snakes, that all goes away. And so the prey goes into an oxygen debt. It uses up all the oxygen in the hemoglobin for wherever the cells are, and then the snake dies. And this is also why when you see, and it's starting now, I'm on a bunch of field herper forums, Jesus, it's not 1995, Facebook pages, and I'm already starting to see the black king constricting the copperhead, the black king constricting the hognose, the black king constricting the garters. That's what I've seen in the past week. They do this, only they do this right around the heart of a snake. They actually modify their behavior when they're killing a snake. When they're killing a mammal, that's when you get this like crazy the concentric circles, if you will. And by doing that, with a snake in particular, they put so much force on that snake that they stop its heart because they're cold-blooded, their metabolism's slower, and you've got to basically stop all blood movement, because if that snake's able to in any way respire, it's going to live longer. And so they're essentially just shutting down their prey with full power. And this is why they are the king of kings. And when you have facts like I just brought you that can deny that, I'll honor your opinion. But until then, at least scientifically, I am on Team Getchula. The end. Done.
So you remind me of a story.
Okay.
Because I can't dispute any of that. Other than I'm sitting here thinking, if I was a rat snake listening to this, what would my reply be? So when I was in high school, I was one of those guys that I didn't have straight A's, but I had solid grades, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have to work for it. You know, one of those. So if I did, like there was one semester in high school, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get straight A's this semester. And I went and got straight A's because I worked for it. But most of the time I was screwing off. I like to laugh. I like to have fun, you know. Well, I want to say it was like a algebra class I was in. And there was a girl, and this was one of the meanest things I think I've ever done. That looking back, it rubbed me the wrong way, and I responded poorly. So we got our report cards, and this girl that I was friends with, who had straight A's up until this report card, got a B in that class, and she was upset, very upset. She was upset because she got that B. Well, I also got a B, and I started kind of taking offense to it. That she was that upset for getting the B. So at that point, I walked up and I said, hey, listen, I know you worked hard, you know, and I know you're disappointed. I want to tell you that, you know, this last semester, I didn't work hard. I screwed off. I didn't pay as much attention as I should have, you know, homework was late a lot, you know, but when we look at our report cards, we've got the same damn letter. So that's kind of where I'd be sitting at as a rat snake right now, so they've got to do all this squeezing, all this perfect coil, all this strength, all this muscle. But you know what? I throw one loop around here, and at the end of it, we're both just staring at a dead mouse.
Yeah.
So that's kind of all the hoopla to get the same damn result.
Until my king snake goes, hi, bites you on the freaking face, and then stops your heart dead in motion. Who's getting the grade dead?
Oh, I love it.
So there you go. And by the way, that paper was by David Penning and Brad Moon. So there you go.
And by the way, I know you will never hear this, but Rebecca, I'm sorry for doing that back in sophomore year.
Oh no, I know that feeling. I may have married somebody that didn't get less than an A in college on anything, and I got a lot of C's, and we both got the same degree. So anyway, okay, are we ready to bring on our guest? I'm excited for this one.
It's time to class this up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. There we go. All right. So bringing to the stage currently, and I only say that because it says add to stage on the computer. So we have from Colubrid Fest, Dr. Zac Whitman, our resident Colubrid and Colubroid Radio veterinarian. We are thrilled to have Dr. Whitman here after seeing the talk he gave at Colubrid Fest. I know, well, actually, before he gave the talk at Colubrid Fest, we said we got to have you on the show. After seeing the talk at Colubrid Fest, it was like, yeah, this is happening. Because we oftentimes mention veterinarians, and let's be real, in herpetocultural circles, you get the, like, I don't want to take my snake to a dog and cat vet. They don't know what's going on. Well, I can flat out tell you Dr. Whitman knows what's going on because he's a keeper like us too, and a veterinarian. So it doesn't get any better than that. So the other Dr. Zac, or maybe the Dr. Zac, depends on how you look at that. How you doing, man? Welcome to Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Good. Thanks for having me, guys. It's super exciting to be on my favorite podcast.
All right. There we go.
Love it.
So with that being said, it's standard issue practice. We've never had a veterinarian on before, which is cool. So if you wouldn't mind giving us your background and then maybe how you ended up going the vet route, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with anything that moved, just total biophile from a really young age. When I was really young, it wasn't reptiles in particular, but that came on pretty fast. When I was 8 years old, after a long time of working on my mom, I finally convinced her to let me get my first snake, and got this little pencil-sized California king snake. Was my first snake, and had that snake for the majority of my life. And
nice.
Never been without a Cal King under my roof since then. So Team Getula.
Team Getula. Thank you. Finally.
I can't hate on Mountain Kings. I love all Kings.
Same. I just love ribbing him. So.
Everybody.
So yeah, growing up when I was a little kid, I kept a lot of different, common stuff. I was breeding leopard geckos in my bedroom when I was 11 years old, and king snakes followed pretty shortly after that. And when I was in high school, I got a job at a local reptile shop that opened up right near my house, and that was kind of like best possible thing that could have ever happened in my life. I am currently 40, and so when I was kind of coming into herpetoculture was mid to late 90s, which was just a really, really cool window of time in the hobby. You had Reptiles magazine blowing up, you had the kingsnake.com forums blowing up, you had the morph game starting, in its infancy. There were not a lot of restrictions on imports, and you had tons and tons of wild stuff coming in. So it was really cool. And I just basically throughout all of high school just lived at this shop all day long, and then scrolled on the King Snake forums all night long.
Nice.
And that was what I was into. If you had asked me when I was a little kid, I probably would have told you I wanted to be a veterinarian. But the road to actually doing it is not necessarily a straight one. It's a super, super competitive thing to get into. And so there were definitely times in my life where I wasn't sure if I was gonna continue down that road. Sort of like Clint was just saying, I would rather pay attention to the content of what I'm learning and not focus so much on the grade, and have time to have a good time and that kind of thing. Got plenty of C's and still managed to get my way into vet school. But I went to the University of Vermont, where I got a undergrad BS in animal science, and then took a couple tries applying to vet school and continuing to build up my application and get more experience, and eventually got into Colorado State. And since then, I've been practicing and keeping reptiles here in New York.
All right, there you go.
Very cool. What do you
And then-
currently keep?
Yeah.
I currently keep a decent ball python collection. One of my passion projects is anthill pythons. I do have a couple of Cal Kings, some locality specific stuff, a couple of morphs that I've been working with for 20 years. I have recently picked up some really fun locality Asian rats from Matt at Sarpamitra, and I'm really excited about that. Those guys, maybe one pair is big enough to go this year, but probably will be pumping out some Asian rat snakes next year. Got some Byard's rats, some Hog Island boas, some Savu pythons, got a whole variety of stuff. Non-snake stuff. I right now have some pancake tortoises. I've been having a lot of fun with Williams geckos. I'm tucked in the corner of my bedroom right now because it's the only place I have internet and quiet in my house, but I'm right next to my my Williams geckos over here. So yeah, that's what I keep in my personal collection right now. I also do a ton of wildlife stuff. So in the Northeast, most of our reptiles are aquatic turtles. So I have a whole building full of turtles. And I used to keep a ton more colubrids. I've sort of had two separate reptile collections in my life. When I was in college and in vet school, I was building up a pretty big collection, almost entirely colubrids, mostly locality specific stuff, mostly fossorial ground dwelling stuff, lots of kings, milks, pituophis, that kind of stuff. But my senior year of vet school, I got diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of lymphoma. And I had about 150 snakes and a major life scare. And I basically had to sell off almost the entire collection. So I kept a handful of the king snakes that were just like sentimental pets, just a couple of other things, but I got rid of almost everything. And it took a little while to, after luckily overcoming that. It's been 13 years in remission right now. Took a little while before, breeding reptiles is a long game, not a short-term thing. So it took a little while before I was ready to start building up the collection again. And when I did that, it was sort of the peak of the ball python market going crazy. And I'd never been a big morph guy, but one of the reasons that this podcast is one of my favorites is the way that you guys talk about it as bridging the gap. And I saw this ball python industry just absolutely exploding, and so many hundreds of people just getting really into reptiles, but being very siloed into this ball python morph thing. And so I'm a genetics nerd. I always like the genetics. I can totally get into the morph thing. The ball python morph game, staying on top of the newest, best morph was never really my thing. But I do think the ball python morphs are beautiful. And so I did invest in that when I got back into keeping, and I kind of wanted to use my platform to bridge the gap and help introduce some of those ball python people to some of the other aspects of herpetoculture and conservation and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that like what you were just saying about, enjoying the morphs and the genetics behind it, because I'm the exact same way on that piece. Like I remember, when being a child, I'm drawing my squares out, and I'm, big R, little r, and big A, little a, and I'm figuring out. That excited me. And I mean, even my children, I started working on, with my boys when they were 6, we were sitting down and doing some of that stuff because I thought that was so exciting. And so it's weird because whenever talking to people about morphs, I love morphs. I really do enjoy morphs because of the genetics behind it. And if you put this one to this one, what are you going to come up with? And what I don't like is the chasing of morphs. where in order for you to stay relevant or be relevant or feel relevant, you have to constantly be trying to be ahead of someone, because I don't want to feel that I have to be ahead of my friends. It's no, that's not what this is about. It's, so that's when it started to get not as fun for me, on the ball python realm, is when that's what it was. And when, if you didn't have XYZ morph, you were kind of, oh, oh, you don't have that, it's so, that's just not as fun for me anymore. So I get kind of what you're saying there on.
I like keeping reptiles for their lifespan, and I have no need to be cycling through my breeders every 5 years because I don't have rack space for the most current morph. When I'm looking at what I want to keep, I'm looking at what does the adult look like, and is that a beautiful animal? And as long as the answer to that is yes, then there's probably going to be a market for it. And yeah,
perfect.
I agree.
All right, so you've mentioned conservation. Sorry, is that okay?
No, good. Yeah.
And I know that you do some conservation work, and we're all pro conservation here. So tell listeners a little bit about your nonprofit. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I have two different kind of operations going on. On one side of things, I have my breeding business, which is conservation herpiculture. And on, that's where I'm breeding stuff, I'm selling stuff. I try and make it really philanthropic. I donate at least 10% of our proceeds to go to either reptile research, reptile vet med, organizing stuff, or directly to reptile conservation specific organizations. Realistically, it's probably a lot more than 10%. But that's the business side of things. And then I also have a not-for-profit, which is called the Center for Reptile and Amphibian Conservation, and I have virtually no web presence for that one. But that one primarily, what we do is I do have a wildlife rehabilitation center, and I only treat reptiles here. So probably 95% of that is Northeast turtles. Occasionally we get some snakes or some toads or something else, but most of the time it's turtles that have been hit by cars, lawnmowers, chewed on by dogs, you name it, we've seen it. And a lot of those turtles come in with eggs. So right now we're recording this at the end of April, and the turtle faucet is just turning on. The past couple days here in New York, I've started getting phone calls, and for the next 2-3 months, we're going to get probably 80% of our caseload through the rehab over just a couple month period when the turtles are most active. And the reason I focus on turtles through the rehab is because of their biology. Turtles, their life history is basically the adults live forever, and they make lots and lots and lots and lots of babies. And if just a couple of the babies survive, that's what they need. But as soon as you start removing adults from the populations start to decline. And it is a slow decline that is very easy to miss. Over our lifetimes, we have all seen the number of box turtles on the road drop off. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter where you are on the East Coast, you've seen that. And there's good data that shows that if you have isolated populations of turtles and you're killing one adult turtle a year getting hit by a car, that population is on a slow decline. And so, when I rehab bunnies or squirrels or, whatever else comes into my animal hospital, you feel like you're doing something nice for that one little animal that you get to release a few weeks later kind of thing. But when I get to put back together a 50-year-old snapping turtle and incubate all of her eggs and release her and 60 of her babies next year, it just feels like you're doing something a little bit more meaningful for the whole population. There's not too many instances where treating individual animals as a veterinarian can maybe have a conservation level impact, and so I just feel like it's a cool area to focus on. The other piece of what we do through the nonprofit is we're starting to do a lot of Head Start work, and that is what I'm most proud of. I live right in a really unique area in Dutchess County, New York, where we have almost every single northeastern turtle species here. So I live in an overlap range where we have wood turtles, bog turtles, spotted turtles, Blanding's turtles. These are all some of the most rare species on the East Coast, and they're literally all found within 15 minutes of my house.
Wow.
So it's a unique opportunity where I am to do what I'm doing. But we're doing head starting with the Blandings. We're working with the New York State DEC. We're working with a not-for-profit land conservancy, the Wetlands Trust. And so every year for the past 5 years, we've been head starting a big group of baby Blandings turtles, and we've gotten, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but probably 400 or so baby Blandings turtles raised up and released at this point.
Wow.
Fantastic.
So I got a whole room in my reptile building dedicated to only the Blandings and keeping those guys quarantined away from everything else. But that's what I do on the nonprofit side.
That's right. The head starting, like how long, how big, like when do you decide it's time to release? I'm just curious.
Yeah, man, we could do a whole freaking episode or a whole fucking
you
whole
got
book
my
on
attention. So.
a whole book on head starting. But no, it's a process. So first of all, the population I'm working with is maybe one of the longest monitoring studies that's ever been done. We've been keeping track of these Blandings turtles at this particular site for over 30 years. And it's a site that's been heavily human impacted. They actually literally transplanted a wetland. There was a high school that wanted to expand its football fields and its parking lots, and they were surrounded by wetlands, and the state told them you could do it, but you have to replace whatever wetlands you destroyed. And they brought on some biologists because there were rare Blandings turtles living in the area, and they basically dug a new wetland and transplanted it 4x8 forklift at a time, mud, plants, trees, everything, and moved a wetland. And we've been monitoring the Blandings turtles on this site for decades. So coming into it, what these people are, what there's students involved, there's high school involved, there was a professor at Vassar involved. But basically, it's like this awesome citizen science project in some ways, and loosely affiliated with the schools. But these people for 30 years have been setting traps. So, imagine like a giant minnow trap, but the turtle size, a hoop trap, catching the females in the early spring, palpating them, seeing if they're gravid. If they're gravid, they get a transmitter put on them. Then we stand out on the side of the pond every night in nesting season. And if they're in the water, we go home. And if they're on land, we go and find them. And then we sit there and we watch them and we wait for hours and hours and hours while they dig their nests. And then we cage the nests. And we come back and we check the cages every day until they hatch. And then we collect the babies, and then the babies come to me. And we've been experimenting with how fast is the best, reptile growth rates are very plastic. We have found that somewhere in the 75 gram ballpark is where the survival rate really takes off. If you release them before then, they're food for everything. And if you release them above that, you get pretty good survival rates. But we're currently experimenting a lot with what the best thing to do is. The past 2 years, I've kept back a cohort for a second year. So we're experimenting with releasing some bigger 2-year-olds versus the 1-year-olds, but ton of really interesting decision making going on in terms of how many we keep, where we release them, which females we choose to keep from, and which females we release right away, how many we keep, how big to get them, how quickly, all those kinds of things.
When you talk about the size of the turtle before releasing it and survivability, so I tried to do my part once, and my mother had a little pond behind her house, and there'd be red ear sliders, down there. And one had laid its nest right, near the pond, and a raccoon was digging it up. Mother called me because she didn't want she likes the turtles out there, so she didn't want these eggs hurt. So I go out, I dig them up, throw them in an incubation tray, and I incubate them with the understanding as soon as these guys hatch, we're taking them right back down that pond. But we were going to make an event of it, right? I go down there with these little hatchlings in the incubation tray, and I've got my little nieces and nephews all with me. We're all going to get to release these turtles. We released the turtles. Never even thought that we started hearing pop, pop, pop. The bass were just going nuts, and I never even dawned on me. I mean, I was just saying, if they would have hatched right then and walked down, the same thing was going to happen to whatever number of them it did. But you know, the kids are, what's going on? Nothing. You know, fish are happy to see them. You know,
Yeah.
But I mean, you just don't realize that. Yeah, I mean, you have this, you know, these dozen, 20, whatever plus eggs, but how many of them, as soon as they hit the water, gone? You know, and that's even if the eggs hatch, because if my mother went and saw the raccoon, they'd wiped out that whole, you know, whole clutch right there. So, yeah.
Baby turtles have a big uphill battle, that is for sure.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
I don't know. I don't ever talk about this, but I will be talking to you, Dr. Whitman, about the turtle work. I talked to you a little bit about it at Klubert Fest, but at the university I'm opening, if it'll ever be freaking finalized, the Appalachian Aquatic Conservation Center, and 50% of the space is dedicated to turtle conservation. And we've been working with spotted turtles, and then we're working with AZA, the Zoo Association, Zoo and Aquarium Association, and we're trying to get through the bureaucracy to the point where we can get box turtles because of all the poaching, and then they get seized at airports, and then nobody knows what to do with them because they've got this virus called ranavirus or mycoplasma and all these diseases.
Yep.
And yeah, no, I'm about to jump into that head first. I've got a graduate student who's doing her thesis on spotted turtles, and we're making these little turtle models. It's funny you brought up the raccoons, so we'll make this full circle. And turns out that with raccoons, they smell the turtles, but there's also a lot of visual-based predation. Like they know what a turtle looks like and will run up to it. And at some of these sites, they're wondering, like, if we release these spotted turtles, what is the likelihood of raccoons feeding on them? So we're going to be using camera traps and turtle decoys and looking at how often are the turtle model turtles. I am not staking out live spotted turtles to be eaten by raccoons. That's not happening. But like, what time of day? When is it the same raccoon? Is it different raccoons? Like all that kind of stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah, we should definitely touch base about all that. We've had we basically have found that the biggest barrier to success with this artificially moved wetland is the nesting areas. The artificial nesting area is relatively small and has a fence that keeps the turtles off of the fields and parking lots and stuff like that. And all the turtles lay their eggs along the fence, and it takes one predator to walk the fence every night to get every single one. Yeah. And we have videos of it where we don't protect the painted turtle nests, but we see them out there, and 99% of them are dug up by one skunk.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway,
I'll say I hope everyone's enjoyed this episode of Kluber and Turtle Radio. You know, we digress.
Yes, we digress. Well, we're all about conservation.
Yeah, no, I love it. This has been a very interesting conversation.
Right. So
go ahead.
No, you go for it, man.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, so I think let's kind of segue now into the topic at hand. Yeah. We talked about the talk, there at Klubert Fest on dystocia and, egg binding. So we're going to kind of bring that now to the audience. It's not going to be the talk because to really get the full feel of Dr. Whitman's talk on this, you need to see the visuals. You need to see, I mean, it starts off with the anatomy, so you understand how this happens, why it happens, and it was, just brilliantly put together. For this media, we're going to hit kind of some of the highlights and points, on basically causes and maybe some ways to handle some of the things that come along with it. So I think maybe that's where we start. When we're talking about egg binding in, we could say reptiles, but obviously we want to kind of shrink that down into colubrids for this conversation. Can you share with us what you feel some of the common, causes are?
Yeah, I think that, it depends how far back you want to go. I think that successful reproduction and successful egg laying is the end result of a lot of factors that go into the health and well-being of that snake over the course of their life. So you could take this all the way back to nutrition. You could take it all the way back to selecting your breeders even. But I think in the micro short term, if you're talking about the factors that are affecting a snake from springtime on, when she's getting ready to lay her eggs, I think some of the main factors are, is she physiologically healthy? So does she have the temperature gradients that she needs for her body to perform the functions that it's trying to perform? Hydration is a big piece of it. A lot of snakes are not very good drinkers, and they really exist more by conserving moisture than by actively consuming it. And I think that's sort of a common chronic problem is low humidity. Another big factor is the egg laying site itself. Everything that you were bringing up in the beginning about the nest boxes, which I'm so excited that that you brought to reality. Thank you for that. That's really cool. One of the biggest factors is definitely whether or not the female has a good spot to lay that she is happy with. Because if you think about it, a female snake does not have a whole lot of impact on what happens to her offspring. And one of the only decision-making points that she has there is where to leave her eggs. And they're really looking for someplace dark and private. And, one thing that I did want to mention, my experience with colubrids in particular is with the North American fossorial species, but there are so many thousands of colubrids, and we know so little about their actual nesting preferences. If you think about something else like birds, there are so many thousands of bird species that make so many subtle variations in their nests, and different species that you couldn't even tell apart by looking at them. You can only tell apart by what kind of nest they build.
Yeah.
And we kind of treat all of our snakes like they're going to lay the exact same way. I think that one of the things that stood out to me right away when I finished my talk at Colubrid Fest, and I one of my biggest regrets is that we didn't have time for sort of a group conversation and questions and that kind of thing, because immediately afterwards people came up to me and were asking me stuff, and I was like, I should have talked about that. I wish I had said that. That's such a good question. But one of the things is that came up that I'd actually love to hear a little bit more from you guys, is some of the different species choices and how you think some of these different species that we work with might be looking for different things. But yeah, nest box selection or nest site selection is a really important one. What I don't like seeing is snakes cage cruising for 10 days after their pre-lay shed. To me, if your snakes are out and about, pressing their noses against their tubs and their cages, you're probably going to see problems associated with those eggs being delayed a little bit. Other factors, body condition. So, both muscle tone and obesity and strength and all those types of factors are definitely a piece of it. And then just kind of the bad luck things that can truly go wrong. I feel like a lot of people think that these are the main problems. Everyone thinks that if their snake gets egg bound, it's because the oviduct is twisted, or because the egg is too big to fit, or the egg is deformed, or something like that. And those things certainly happen, but that's not the majority of the cases. Probably the one sort of silent thing that I feel like a lot of people aren't quite tuned into is how big of a role infection plays in it. The oviduct is supposed to be a sterile environment, and the cloaca is not a sterile environment. And when you have snakes, especially if they're delaying egg laying because they don't like their nesting spot, gives the opportunity for bacteria to get up into the oviduct, and once an infection is up in there, then there's a lot of other downstream effects from that.
Man.
So I would say those are some of the main kind of broad causes.
I have a question. This is based off an observation, and when you do observations, just to kind of give the listeners my thought process. I trained scientist here. I always, whenever I come up with an idea, like I think I've trained myself to always think about the opposite of A as a possibility. And in science, we call that the null hypothesis. And so like I have this hypothesis about slugs, infertile eggs, based off a couple observations where The only times that I have truly had, like, I mean, we're talking full blown impacted. She's not passing them. She's full. It was with infertile clutches where I didn't breed the snake, but she made follicles anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the hypothesis that I come up with is, okay, so if we're in that scenario and these infertile clutches are leading to the worst cases of dystocia I'm seeing, then it makes a whole lot of sense to make those clutches in the future fertile clutches because they evolve to pass fertile eggs. But then we talk about giving females a year off. But once you get that reproductive system primed and going, I don't necessarily think evolutionarily these snakes evolve to have a year off. I think when they live in the perfect environment of human care and we're giving them a mouse, a chick, a mouse, a chick, a mouse, a chick, that we actually could do more harm not breeding them because of this issue. But the null hypothesis is, Loughman, you're full of crap. So my question that I didn't get to ask you at Colubrid Fest that I wanted to, because we were talking about this year at the university, because on the one hand, everybody loves babies until you have to take care of them. And my staff was like, are we really going to breed like that many snakes? And I was kind of like, I don't want to deal with infertile clutches. So do you have any, like, is there any truth to, in your veterinarian opinion, to my biological idea, or ecological idea, or do you disagree, agree, and feel free to like shoot it down?
100%. Really glad you started right there, because that was pretty much the first question that people came up to me after the Colubrid Fest talk was, I ran into problems after I had given my female a year off. So let me think. A couple things to respond to. So first of all, 100% an infertile clutch is much more likely to have trouble than a fertile clutch. Slug eggs are often abnormally textured, abnormally shaped. Just a whole bunch of different. To me, a slug egg is a mild problem, but it's not a normal part of the reproductive cycle. So the fact that there's a slug egg already means that something has gone a little wrong there. And yes, definitely more likely to see slugs cause problems. And I agree with you. I would rather, if I didn't want the eggs, I would rather throw away or feed off fertile eggs than throw slugs in the garbage or risk having problems. I think what it gets to the heart of is something that I know I've heard you guys address on this podcast a lot, and something that I think is like the heart of herpetoculture, is we're trying to, what are ideal conditions? We have these animals who are evolved for a certain set of conditions, and life in the wild is hard, and the majority of animals don't survive those conditions. And to some extent, some amount of struggle is good. You don't want to make it too easy. You want your snakes to move around and exercise and those kinds of things. So I think there's this inherent tension between, we want all our babies to survive, right? You don't want to only have 10% of your clutches surviving like they do in the wild. And you want to provide these ideal conditions. And if you're good at it, and if you provide ideal conditions, then your females are going to be in good shape, and they're going to show you what their biology can do with their reproductive output. And I think that it's difficult because, we want to give our snakes the perfect temperatures, the perfect amount of food. And then when they lay one clutch of eggs, we want to be like, hold on, stop now. That's enough. And they don't just shut down like that. If you envision what the optimal environment is, the ideal wild year for a wild snake, what that would look like, no late frosts and a big acorn year. So all the mice are going crazy that year, and they're just chowing down, eating one clutch of baby mice after another. There's definitely been examples of snakes double clutching.
It's well, on that note, real quick, if you don't mind, when I was researching the book on Dipsat or xenodontines in South America, the false water cobras, musaranas, where they live, the basic modus, like the mode of their life history, I can't think. Their life history strategy, that's the word I'm looking for, is there's such high, insane predation pressure on these little snakes down there that a false water cobra female, she literally needs to make, if she gets to 6 foot in the wild, she's doing something right. She should be making 60 babies a year, because a million things, literally, in some instances, are out there eating those babies, and maybe 1 out of 60 is going to make it to survival, or make it to survival, make it to adulthood. And it wasn't until I was looking at their biology and I realized, same thing with Western hognose snakes. This has been documented with Nasicus. There's strong evidence in nature that they're double clutching.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot. There's this idea, and I understand it. I understand it when you take biology out of the mix. I don't understand it if you're actually looking at what the biology is telling you. That's where there's this like, I don't want to double clutch her because she's going to use up too many of her resources. If she goes into that mode, this is my next question, and she's going to produce it, throw the male in there, because you're going to get slugs. Because I lost 3 hognose snakes the first year I bred hognose snakes, because they got these insane slugs. I mean, it almost looked like 2 of the oocytes bonded together, and they formed these. They look like chicken nuggets. They did not look like eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're usually harder.
uh-huh.
You'll get some of the soft slugs, but when you get the hard slug, those are the dangerous ones, because the eggs, as they're pushing through, the egg gives a little. It can squeeze down and soft, but those hard slugs,
But after that, I've thrown the boys in, because I know they're going to double clutch. I've given them the nutritional requirements necessary for them to double clutch. Evolutionarily, they're designed to double clutch, so I gave them the reason, like the nutrients for them to double clutch. So, in your opinion, good, bad, ugly, no, yes, whatever. Like,
I think it depends on what your goals are. There are so many aspects of it. Every choice you make is going to have an outcome. I know we don't want to jump into the full anatomy of everything, but I just want to take like 2 minutes so that we're all kind of talking about the same things and explain why the slugs are a problem and why giving them a year off is a problem and what's kind of going on there. So as far as the reproductive tract is concerned, in a snake, you have the ovary, which is a really thin, little, delicate, kind of wispy tissue, just some blood vessels, and essentially egg yolks. When we talk about follicles, those are the egg, the yolk, and the single-celled egg that's still attached to the ovary and still attached to the bloodstream. And when they're building up follicles, that's when their body is taking all the nutrients out of their bloodstream and turning it into egg yolk and storing it away. And those are all the nutrients that offspring is going to live off of in the egg. When they ovulate is when that follicle, the egg yolk, breaks off the ovary and it enters the oviduct, which is a really thin-walled, simple tube that just connects the ovary to the cloaca. And the oviduct is sometimes called the uterus or the shell gland, but that's where the egg whites are laid down. That's where the egg would be fertilized. If the sperm is present, it's going to be in the oviduct. And that's where the shell is laid down. And then eventually, right before the eggs are laid, they pass out of the oviduct through a little sphincter into the cloaca and come out. Snakes start building up those follicles the year before they're going to lay them. Most species. Some species start several years before. But those, what you essentially have is you have a blood supply leading to these little yolk sacs, and those sacs can get bigger as the snake is building up those follicles, and they can also regress those follicles. Once they ovulate, once those follicles break off the ovary, something's coming out. They don't reabsorb anything from the oviduct. Mm-hmm. So what a slug is a yolk that's come off, it's ovulated, it's in the oviduct, and it hasn't been fertilized for whatever reason. And maybe it gets a shell, maybe it doesn't. Slugs, you guys have seen, slugs can all look a lot of different ways. But the problem comes in when the female doesn't breed and goes to resorb those ovum. It doesn't always go perfectly. And what I sometimes see in geriatric pet female snakes, someone will bring in their 12-year-old female corn snake that's never been bred, and I'll feel things that feel like small, kind of hard ovum in there. And it's because over the years in the springtime, she's built up some follicles. They've gotten to a decent size. They're full of nice, beautiful, liquid yellow egg yolk. And then there's no breeding and there's no seasonal cycle, and those yolks shrink back down. And the next spring, that same follicle, not a different one, that same follicle with that same year-old egg yolk in there is growing a little bit bigger again. And this time that yolk might not be as perfect and liquidy and nice anymore. And certainly by the third or fourth or fifth year, it's getting a little bit funky. And so the medical term for when protein kind of congeals and turns from a liquid to a solid is called inspissated. But I often see these old follicles in snakes, and they can be there for a long time and not cause a problem. But they can also get infected or get twisted or get weird things happen to them and cause issues. But when you ovulate a follicle that's been in there for 2 years, you're just much more likely to have a weird egg, a weird shaped egg, two of them that are connected to each other in a weird way. So I see tons and tons and tons more problems with females who were given the year off when they have the body conditions that they can lay eggs for the next 3 seasons in a row if you cut their diet in half. So yes, I do think there are issues with giving, when we think about species that don't breed every year in the wild, it's not because they're just like taking a vacation. It's because they don't have the calories and the resources they need to pull off their reproductive cycle. If you want to keep, if I've personally never bred timbers or anything. Timbers breed like every 3 years in the wild. But my gut tells me that if you kept timbers and fed them enough, they would probably breed more regularly than that. And if you want to keep your snakes in a way that they're not going to breed every year, then you're going to be keeping snakes in a way that maybe some of your females are going to be looking pretty skinny, and maybe some of your females aren't going to do that well either. Not every snake in these wild conditions survives every year. So, to answer your question, to do it or not, I think it depends on your goals. If your goals are to have a reproductively active snake and to breed snakes and to make a lot of babies, then I would say my best recommendation is to make your husbandry ideal, support your females ideally, give them as big of a temperature gradient as you can, give them the best nutrition you can, and then sit back and enjoy all the babies that she can make. If you have a pet snake and you care much more about their longevity and that type of thing, then I think maybe some of your husbandry choices really should be different in terms of how you're cycling your temperature over the course of the year and your food over the course of the year, and those types of factors. When we're talking about ectothermic animals, their basal metabolic rate is really, really variable. And something that's like fascinating. I'm a fish guy also. And when you talk about keeping tropical fish, there's always a range of temperatures that you can keep them at. You can keep an angelfish at 76 or 83. And if you keep a fish at 83 degrees, they don't live as long. They get real big. They get real big real fast, and they breed a ton. And if you keep a fish cold, and they're born with a certain number of heartbeats, and you turn up the temperature, and things start going faster. So I don't think there's a ton of truth to breeding a female out. I've had king snakes that have triple clutched 8 years in a row. I've really pushed snakes to see what they can do. I don't come on here and tell people about things I've been reading on Facebook. I have kept fed king snakes every day, and see what happens. And then I feed them. I've fed other king snakes every 14 days and see what happens. And you can do it. You can do it in both ways. I've bred king snakes on both those feeding schedules. But they use their temperatures really differently, and they produce a very different amount of offspring. And so there's no one right or wrong way to do it. But all these decisions that you make will have impacts. I definitely think you're right that there's a lot of problems that are caused by trying to give a female a year off when her husbandry is good and her body condition is good and she's ready to go.
I think a major issue kind of the modern wave of herpetoculture is there's this anthropomorphic based set of ideals of how we should take care of these animals. And they're very mammal centric, human centric, dog cat centric. And one of the things we've preached since day one is like, know the biology of the beast. Like if you understand how, if you don't look at it through human eyes, if you look at it through snake eyes, if you read some books, learn about the biology of the animals, compare a tropical species to a temperate species, they're dealing in a completely different thermal window, seasonal window, and a species that's native to North America, especially northern parts, they got to get their whole life history done in 6 months. If you push it up into Canada, they got to get it done in 4 months. Whereas a Cribo down in Ecuador, it's got essentially 12 months of activity. And I think that is really part of this whole equation that we don't look into to that. But at the same time, I talked about the false water cobras, how I double clutch them. Dry marking, which we keep at the university, and I keep here at the university and I've talked to a lot of people, and I work with Dr. Bogan at OCIC. They don't double clutch. There's no data to support them double clutching. There's no data from the field that supports that they double clutch. And so I'm not going to double clutch them. You know what I mean? I'm not, the male gets, they also have a much more involved reproductive biology where the males are literally beating the hell out of the females. And that's a life history behavioral strategy of where finding a mate is difficult. When you find one, you got to subdue her and mate with her because you may not get another chance for the next couple of years because it's just so difficult to find them. So, yeah, I think that throwing the natural history in there, that should be the driver, in my opinion, not we're going to burn the snakes out. I think some of these, especially the dipsadids, they may be able to handle it. And I'm not promoting that, but I am saying if you breed your hog and she wants a double clutch and you're dealing with these slugs we just talked about, I would throw the male in. And then the final thing, which I know this happens a lot in the zoo world and in the private sector, it's like somewhat blasphemous to say, you don't have to incubate the eggs. If you're worried about making too many, there's a lot of things that will eat those eggs.
100%.
So you just don't have to, but you're going to have a healthy snake. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
One thing before we get too far away from it that I want to go back, because it's something you just mentioned about this is information you've lived. This is not something you read. This is, you with these king snakes every day for years and years. That's a point that I make a lot, where in today's society, today's social media world, or even just, having Google at your fingertips, too often we Google an answer and we feel that that's the answer because, well, we just saw it on 8 sites. The problem, though, is those 8 sites read it on another site and put it on there, especially when we're talking about care of a reptile. When we go, and the biggest example for me is sand is the devil when it comes to bearded dragons. And it's like, that is not experienced information, that is regurgitated information. That's why you see it so well everywhere I look. That's what it said, because they said the same thing. They read it somewhere and then they made this care sheet, and they've never put a bearded dragon on sand. The people who are, putting this out there, it's things like that. So I love that you just made that particular statement, that this is information and these are things that you have actually experienced and lived, not just that you read it somewhere, because I think that's why I love having the guests on that we have, because they are experts on the area that they're talking about. Because it's not just literature. It's not just, I saw this in a group. It's, I screwed this up this many times before I got it right this many times by tweaking this, and this is the true piece. So when you said it, I'm like, that's one of my favorite things to hear. You know what I mean? So wanted to point that out. Well,
yeah, I think it's just so important to say what you know for sure, because you've seen it with your own eyes, and say what you think because you've seen it but you're not positive, and say what you think because you heard someone else tell you, and say what you don't know at all and you're just guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with saying this is what I think.
I don't know.
I don't have an answer. Hell, how many times on this podcast have I said I have no scientific data to back up what I'm about to tell you? I think, that's just be honest with it. So I think one of the things I'd like to talk about too are some of the other complications that go into the breeding season when it comes, from an organ standpoint, from, the inside. So, one of the things, like, we've got egg binding in the females, but we can have a female can prolapse while laying eggs, or a hemipene can prolapse and be stuck out from the male. Um, when we run into things like that, one, do you have ideas that you can give us on what causes some of that? Like, I mean, for me, prolapses I'm typically have dealt with over the years really haven't been egg related. I've dealt with like chondros having a big bowel movement, and a lot of times they prolapse and it just goes back in as part of their kind of cycle. But I've had it prolapse and then stuck out. And occasionally we'll have a ball python or something that'll do that. But I have had hemipenes get stuck out, and hopefully you catch it before they, shrivel and or
Yep.
dry it out and all that. So can you talk about some causes and then talk about maybe what are things we can try at home, or at least if it's not going to fix it, keeps it ready for us to get it to the vet?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, prolapses are definitely one of the more common things that we see on the vet med side of things. Right now, I work at an emergency room and not an exotics hospital, so I just see anything that comes in the door. But one of the few things that gets reptiles coming in the door in the middle of the night to me is something hanging out the back end. And that can be a male, it can be a female, it can be reproductive related, it could be not reproductive related. I agree with you. I think there are much more common causes of prolapses than repro related things. Most of the time when we see prolapses, they're more related to enteritis, sorry, I shouldn't use so many doctor words.
Let's say I'm going to ask.
Inflammation in the GI tract and the colon from things like parasites or diarrhea, straining from constipation. A lot of it comes from, a lot of people aren't as familiar with, people are very familiar with the calcium metabolism and the vitamin D and metabolic bone disease, and the impacts that has on their skeletal system, but not as many people are quite as aware of the calcium metabolism in the rest of the body and how much impact it has on muscle tone and stuff like that. So one of the biggest things I see is in the basking UVB needing species, all your beardies and aquatic turtles and stuff like that, is sorry, lost my train of thought. I had a point there.
That's okay.
That's all right. No worries.
One of the things that we see with the beardies and the aquatic turtles when they have problems with their calcium and their vitamin D situation is they have poor muscle tone and they get constipated and then they prolapse. So that's a really common situation to see that, but that's not really what we're dealing with in colubrids. As far as what you're dealing with when you see a prolapse, it is a medical emergency. And I think that there's some things that you could do at home if it's mild. There's absolutely things you should try right away. If you can easily just sort of guide it back in, that's fantastic. If you can just gently kind of slide it back in and you catch it early and it's really small and everything is, all the tissue there is pink and happy looking, that's the best case scenario. Sometimes you get those really, really minor prolapses where it's just like almost like the edge of the cloaca is just everting a little bit, and you could just put a little manual pressure on that and get it to go back in. But it's always about finding the underlying cause. So prolapse is almost never a primary problem. So just putting it back in is not going to fix whatever's wrong. Most of the time, if there's any significant amount of tissue out, it's very difficult to get it to go back in on your own. And if it stays out for any length of time, it tends to start getting swollen and edematous and eventually necrotic and damaged if they're dragging it around. And any of those things make it hard to get that tissue to go back in. But prolapses are definitely something that I would not recommend trying to tackle primarily at home. There's something that you might need to deal with until you can get to the vet, like what you were saying. And the most important things with prolapses are keeping that tissue safe. So lubricating it, whatever you have at home, some Vaseline, any kind of personal lubricant, and preventing it from drying out. Taking the animal off of substrate, so putting them on it either on some damp paper towel or just flat plastic bottom. You can try things to reduce the swelling. A lot of people talk about sugar soaking, and I have no problem with sugar soaking. I think that its success rate is fairly low, but it certainly doesn't hurt anything, and it can definitely shrink down the tissue a little bit. So the idea there is that if you have mucous membranes that are hanging out of the body and you pack it with something that's really going to absorb water like sugar, you can suck some of the edema and fluid out of the tissue and shrink it down and get it to go back in normally. But the reason that prolapses really shouldn't be dealt with primarily at home, and any prolapse should see a vet, is because there is usually an underlying problem. So you do want to look at a fecal exam and look for parasites. You do want to think about nutritional problems and calcium problems if you're dealing with non-colubrids. You want to look and see if there's eggs or follicles or anything like that going on. But it's really important to identify the tissue coming out. What can be coming out is colon, cloaca, oviduct, ureter. And getting those things to go back in is not necessarily as simple as popping it back in, and as soon as you can't see it anymore, that means it's in the right spot. So having a vet who can identify what's poking out and whether or not it's salvageable and get it back in with the best anatomy possible is always going to be your best bet for a prolapse. And if you have a prolapse in a situation with egg binding, that's a terrible, terrible situation to be in. Chance that you're getting out of that situation without surgery is very small at that point. You can cause prolapses if you're trying to palpate your snake's eggs. There's a bunch of great videos of people doing that on YouTube.
Yeah.
I've seen quite a few torn oviducts on YouTube videos with people thinking, "No, I just saved my snake, and we'll see you next year," because those eggs don't have a way out anymore. So that's kind of the short version of prolapses. You want to keep the tissue protected, and you want to get into a vet who knows what they're doing as fast as humanly possible. And if it's a couple days and that tissue is turning purple or getting dried out, the chances of that animal making it through that is getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
So I want, because you pretty much have hit every piece that I've done when it comes to, because I kind of have a routine, and it's not, when I say routine, it's not like dealing with prolapses that often, but I mean, in 30 years, I've dealt with them here or there. And that was going to be one of my questions, was the sugar water, because obviously I'd heard that and I do it. Whether or not it makes a difference, I don't know. But I'm like you said, it's not hurting, because if I find a prolapse, first thing I want to do is I soak it for two reasons. One, because I want to make sure that it's not getting dried out. Two, I'm hoping to ensure that animal is hydrated, because that's only going to help, in my opinion, I guess. But three, I also want to try to start getting anything that's on it a little washed off. Any debris,
always going to be covered in
like
substrate.
That. Yeah. So once I've got that off and it's soaked a little bit in sugar water, when you're talking about keeping it lubricated, actually what I use for lubrication is preparation H. And my thought is, it's going to keep it moist, keep lubrication, but also may try to reduce some of that swelling, that may have already occurred before we see it. And it does. And after I've applied that, and I usually give it at least an hour or so of that being applied. And all this is done, by the way, and I'm not telling people to do this, but if you're doing things like this at home, ensure you're wearing gloves, because you're dealing with exposed tissue here, where I'm trying to keep this as sterile as possible for this animal, because like you mentioned earlier, if we get infection in there, we're dealing with a whole other set of problems. But usually after about an hour to 2 hours of having that preparation H kind of on and soaked in, that's when I will attempt, if it's one that I feel can be kind of massaged and put back in there. And usually it's been successful, but again, it's going to really come down to how much is hanging out. And to your point, I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at insides. That's about as technical as I'm getting. So
if you've gotten it back in at home, probably what you're looking at is just that first bit of the cloaca that's inverting on you. If you have oviduct or colon out, very, very difficult to get it back in without a lot of finagling.
Gotcha. With what I just described there, anything that you and I know again we're cautious on suggestions, you know, on that at home care, but anything that you say I should do differently with what I was doing there.
I've heard of people doing the preparation H. I've never personally used it. I think the active ingredient in that is witch hazel. It's never been studied in reptiles as far as I know. I don't know how much of an effect it would have, but again, something I don't think that's terribly harmful. One thing I would mention, two things. If you're going to do a sugar solution, most important thing is that it has to be as concentrated as it can be. There should be some sugar particles floating around at the bottom there. It's not just like putting a couple teaspoons of sugar in some water and calling it a day. You're trying to make it as concentrated as you can. And yeah, paste is perfectly fine. In the hospital, I often will take the sugar, pour it in a paper towel, wet it and saturate it and kind of sit it on there.
Gotcha.
But the other factor is one thing that I would really, I've seen this a couple times on YouTube videos, is triple antibiotic ointment is not lube. It is medication.
No.
Oh dear.
And yeah, there's a couple people that I've seen using Neosporin as lube. That is dangerous for one important reason. The main ingredient in most of these triple antibiotic ointments is neomycin, and that's a great antibiotic to use for topical things on your skin. It is not a great antibiotic to have in your bloodstream because it's not good for your kidneys. And you can get toxic neomycin poisoning if you were putting too much of this stuff on too big of a wound or too much tissue. So, you know, I've seen a couple of really sad cases, not reptile related, where an animal has had an enormous wound, you know, like a hit by car degloving kind of thing. And the owner, before getting to the vet, has just slathered it with neomycin, and you can actually overdose them that way. So the tissue that's sticking out of the back end there is vascular. It's the colon, it's absorptive. And if you go put an antibiotic ointment on there, you're going to be giving them a good dose of that. So I wouldn't use antibiotic ointment for that. And I will also take just this 1 minute soapbox to say something about a little pet peeve of mine that I see almost every day on Facebook. Triple antibiotic ointment with pain relief is perfectly safe for reptiles. Every day I see in giant capital letters, Neosporin without pain relief. The pain relief ingredient is, I think it's pramoxine. It is a very mild painkiller. It is just as safe for reptiles as it is for you or me. And certainly you don't have to use the Neosporin with the painkiller in it. But if you're using Neosporin, if you have a reptile that has a wound or something like that, and you are going to use Neosporin and all you have is the one with the painkiller, it's fine.
There we go.
Nice.
You heard it from the doctor.
That's right. Well, what about hemipenes? Any differences in what we should be doing with when they're dragging their junk around?
Yeah. Hemipenes, really common to get traumatized during breeding or to pull substrate back in with it when they retract and then get an infection. You know, you can have the hemipene stuck out, or you can have it back in and then have an abscess or an infection or something like that going on. For most of our species, the hemipenes are really small and they dry out real fast. So if you're not right on top of it, there's a good chance that you're just going to be looking at a little tiny piece of jerky hanging out. And most of the time, if you bring that to me, we're just going to amputate that guy. And most male snakes will figure out how to breed from the other side. Got two of them for a reason.
Yep.
That's right.
The basic principles, all the same things apply. So lubricate it, keep it moist, keep substrate off of it. You could try sugar on it. Hemipenes are one that sometimes you can get to just go back inside out on your own if you have, a little Q-tip and a little bit of lube. Sometimes you can just kind of poke it back in there. Again, anything you do, you want to be really gentle. but hemipenes usually are not going to be a life-threatening kind of situation, no matter what the situation is, even if you let it get bad.
Yeah,
I've had one. It was a blue beauty, and I felt so bad for that guy. And here I am. I teach about hemipenes. I talk about hemipenes. It's part of my daily life. This is getting a little weird. And I remember looking in the vivarium, and I was like, "What the hell, alien parasite is that?" And then I realized, oh, it's junk. And then I came in the next day, and this junk was out. And I came in the third day, and I was like, "Oh, we got a problem." And I just basically watched that hemipene. I just felt so bad, and then it went away, and that's all I had to say. And I felt very bad for what I had to do.
Well, and one thing to point out to people too, a lot of times when that hemipene is stuck out, that in my experience, it's because there's something keeping it out. And not just like a flat out prolapse, but there's like a piece of bedding or something that for some reason you need to dislodge. And then now if it's been lodged there for a second, then you get the swelling, which prevents it. So I mean, you make sure get that out, then try the other things that we're talking about here, as potential, but flat out keep it moist, because I mean, yeah, that little sucker's going to dry out real fast, and then you got that, like I said, a little jerky, a little raisin snapping off here, but and that's, I guess, one of the things we can say is, when we talk about ways to prevent this stuff from happening, I mean, don't have loose bedding, but I mean, we all pretty much do, so it's just the risk that we take, during it. Because typically for me, it's always been aspen is what I've not really had anything else that I can think, but aspen's what I was primarily using for bedding. So it makes sense why when I've experienced this, aspen's what it was, but little, shredded piece of aspen kind of caught, stuck, and keeps it from retracting. So
I have to say I've never had a hemipene stuck out in my personal collection. So the ones I see are the ones that are 3 days old, and people are bringing them into the hospital.
Yeah, I've had maybe 2 over the years that I didn't catch in time. I've had maybe 6 that I caught, right away, and were able to, sometimes it's just once the little piece is removed, whoop, and it's right back in. So that's the
okay. All right, final thing I want to talk about: impacted musk glands. I went years without impacted musk glands, and then in 1 year I got 2 hogs. Hognose get it quite frequently. I have a fox snake currently that they're pretty gnarly, and we work with several vets, and one of our veterinarians is like, "Oh, we're going to amputate that. We're going to remove it. It's gone." The other veterinarian is like, "It's not really hurting them, and it's kind of a just live with it." But then within herpiculture circles, there's this like, "It's swollen, needs to be expressed." And I'm just really curious about a couple things. A, do you have any idea what causes that? And then B, when you get it, is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Does it case by case basis? If we could just kind of talk this thing through, because I know that this impacts colubrids more than most other species of snakes.
Yeah, definitely. There can definitely be a couple different factors that I think can be implicated in the causes. I think we were just talking about one of the main ones, and that's substrate getting up in there and setting up an infection. The anatomy is slightly different on males and females, but both of them have musk glands in similar locations. In many species, and this is, perfect example, this is something I think, but I don't know. In many species, leopard geckos, and many turtles and tortoises, vitamin A deficiency is really, really commonly implicated in a bunch of different mucous membrane problems.
So that causes the eyes issue for the turtles a lot and tortoises. I'm about to say, I was pretty familiar. Yeah, we've dealt with some of that out here, previously as well.
Vitamin A.
In general, vitamin A deficiency tends to cause problems at the mucocutaneous junctions. So the areas where your skin meets your mucous membranes, like the edges of your eyelids, the edges of your lips, the edges of the cloaca. And so when I see a lot of those type of species coming in with sperm plugs, this is something we see in leopard geckos all the time, is that inflamed cloaca, sperm plug, scent gland inflammation. And in those guys, it's almost always vitamin A related. Almost every single leopard gecko that has that problem is vitamin A deficient. In snakes, it just makes me wonder. I thought it was very interesting. It's not something that's commonly discussed. Nobody talks about sprinkling your vitamin powder on top of your mice. But I was asking around at Kaluberfest, and most of the breeders are doing a little bit of supplementation, especially for their females. And I think that whole prey is a good diet for the most part, but how well does vitamin A stay in the liver of a rat that's been frozen for 9 months?
Right.
I don't know. So possible nutritional related things there. Maybe you could head off some of those issues by supplementing with something, a vitamin powder a couple times a year. I think a lot of those things are just bad luck, though. It's just some substrate getting in there, an infection getting in there. Anytime you have a scent gland in that area, it's ripe for infection. I don't know if you guys have dogs or have any experience with anal glands and the fun things that go on with dog scent glands back there. But any animal that has scent glands back in an area that's really fecally contaminated has the potential to get infected. And the biggest issue that I see is when reptiles get infections, the pus that they create is liquid like it is in mammals. Reptile pus is solid, cheesy substance. And so when you get an infection, you have to get that out. If you don't get the solid stuff out of there, it's not going to ever fully get better. And depending on how big that abscess, or, when we talk about an impacted Musk gland, we're not just talking about one thing. Sometimes it's just that there's secretions and stuff in there, sperm, stuff like that. Sometimes it's that there's an infection, an abscess, and it's full of pus. Sometimes it's really an active infection that is really just inflamed and red and irritated, and there's not a lot of pus in there. So, depending on how big and angry and swollen and open it is and how much discharge there is, there's a lot of different ways to handle these kind of things. But what I see a lot of is people just squeezing out the pus and then calling it a day, like that's gonna be better. And if it's small and it's just a little bit impacted and you can put a little bit of pressure on it and get the material to come out, I think that's reasonable to try at home if it seems mild. And if it's mild, that might be enough to fix whatever the issue was. But if you've got a big pocket full of pus in there, you need to get it out. And there's some ways that maybe that can be expressed through the natural opening. There's some times where you need to go and use a scalpel and get in there. There's sometimes where the gland is just so chronically damaged and inflamed that if you don't just take out the gland, it's never going to get better. It's going to be a chronic issue. So I think the fine points of that kind of problem depend a lot on the severity of it. But the big point I would drill home is that all of these guys will do better and be much less likely to come back if you actually put them on antibiotics. These are pretty significant infections, and if all you do is just remove the pus, you're still leaving behind a traumatized pocket of tissue ripe with bacteria for it to build right back up again. So definitely something where we're getting them on a course of antibiotics will go a long way towards stopping that problem from coming right back again.
Okay. So one thing I've thought a lot about, we did a study. It was actually Kinsey Guthrie, who I've known forever. She's one of the professors in ZooSci. She came back to ZooSci, and one time it was just her and I. And so we started the ZooSci Masters, and I was like, "You're doing this. You're my guinea pig." And her thesis, we did a really cool study that we've never published, and I'm pissed that we haven't done it yet. But we did a thing where we bought animal plastic 6-foot-long vivariums. We put a divider in the middle and cut a doorway so that the snakes could go from one side to the other. And we made identical habitats thermally. So we kind of tried our best to control for the variable of, I just ate a rat, I'm going to go where it's warm. And so we were trying to make it so they were choosing enriched versus unenriched, that classic kind of idea. And one of the things that we found is like some of the snakes chose enriched, some of the snakes chose unenriched. But what was extremely interesting to me was, we're full circle, poop. Didn't matter if they chose enriched side or unenriched side for most of their daily activities. But all taxa, all snakes, the only thing that was common between the ball pythons, the false water cobras, and the corn snakes was when they defecated, they went to whatever habitat they didn't choose to live in. And so they literally went from enriched to unenriched, took a dump, came back. Or they went from unenriched to enriched, took a dump, came back. And that's always kind of stuck with me, because there was this latrine behavior and there was this absolute, like, I mean, it was only because of the study that we were able to see, like, the only time they're choosing to go over there is to void their waste. And so when we keep these things in a vivarium and we don't change substrate out, they defecate, it turns to that powder, there's bacteria on that. Could that then lead to like a high infection rate, or not so much, because the bacteria that are there aren't necessarily the same bacteria that would be causing the infection? Because I've often wondered with naturalistic vivaria, when you're keeping your snake on paper or aspen and it drops an epic deuce, you can totally see that. And you're like, oh God, I got to get that out of there. But when you do these naturalistic setups I have in here, they crap, it blends in. You don't necessarily see where they dumped underneath this cork bark flat. And I've actually found that if I don't have a cleanup crew that's able to deal with it, I get in there and do my deep cleaning, and I'm kind of like, oh God, there's crap everywhere I missed. And I tend to get these infected musk glands in these naturalistic enclosures way more than I get them in the tubs where they've got substrate and hide and water, but it's less heterogeneous. Do you think there's anything to that, or no? Oh, wait.
Oh, hold on.
How did he get muted? Oh. We got him muted, guys, and we don't know what we did. Did he
Max,
mute?
can you figure it out?
Oh, your mic isn't connected.
How about now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
My earbud died and I had to switch to my other side, and
Okay.
the platform didn't like that.
Okay.
Sorry. So talking about whether or not the substrate has a role and whether or not a dirty environment has a role,
Yeah.
and how much of that impacts it. I don't think we really know a ton about how snakes use these scent glands.
Sure.
For lots of species, I think they're more defensive than territory marking. They're going to spray that musk at you when you grab them, and for many species, there's certainly tons of interesting studies out there showing that snakes follow each other's scent trails and find hibernacula like that. And how much of that is just following each other's skin moving through the grass versus how much of that is highly species specific chemicals that are being released from these scent glands. I'm not sure that anyone really knows, and I'm not sure. I don't tend to see what I would consider a lot of marking behaviors. There's lots of animals that you take your dog for a walk and you can watch them mark, and look at a cat and watch them rubbing their head on everything. I don't tend to see snakes doing that necessarily. Reptiles do it. You see it in chameleons and geckos. They drag their hemipenes and not their hemipenes, the hemipenal pores and scent glands on branches, and then they walk around and they lick the branches after going after animals. So really, really interesting ideas, but I don't know that anyone can tell you what the normal expression of musk is for in some of these species, and how they use it. And what, if they're in a dirty cage that already smells like them, do they not scent mark often enough? If they're not getting grabbed by a predator every once in a while, are they not expressing their defensive scent glands often enough? I'd personally be more inclined to think that these are just opportunistic problems with
Gotcha.
bacteria that are normally in there, and that when they have a bowel movement, they get a little piece of substrate or something stuck up in there, or get a little trauma somehow, and just sets up a little infection that ends up turning into a big deal for bad luck kind of reasons. But that's just my gut feeling.
Okay. Well, we have now covered the topics we wish to cover on this one, which means we got to move on to a new one. Sorry about that. Next time. But this was great. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
We will definitely be having you on because you're our resident vet.
I would love to come back. We could talk
Well,
all
and
day.
this gives us an opportunity too, being that we're going to have Dr. Whitman back on, occasionally as the CCR resident vet. I know we ask you guys all the time for ideas, but now here we have something specific to target and ask you about. This is your moment to ask the vet. So if you have topics you would like for us to throw at Dr. Whitman here and, kind of get that take on from someone who is both a veterinarian and a keeper, which you don't always get to have those hand in hand. So please shoot those to us, whether that's on Facebook, whether that's at CC Radio Podcast at gmail.com. You can go to the website. There'll be links to contact us there, or directly send it to Zac or I, because we would love to know what you guys would like to hear about from Dr. Whitman. You can also hit us on the Discord server and get those questions out for us there too.
Heck yeah. So if people want to find animals you produced or maybe donate to your conservation fund, where can people go to find more information about that? And you?
Yeah, best place to find me is Conservation Herpiculture on Facebook or Instagram. And always happy to chat with anyone who wants to reach out about anything.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, this was great. Clint, where can people find you? You
can find everything that we have available at Metazotics.com, including those cool-ass nest boxes that we showed you earlier. You can also reach me on Facebook, Clint Bartley, or Metazotics on Facebook as well, MetazoticsLLC on Instagram, and our email is metazotics@gmail.com.
All righty. If you want to find out what I'm into, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook. Look up the university. The Zoo Science page has a Facebook page. West Liberty Biology at West Liberty University Biology. I should know this, and I don't. But we have we're doing a big social media push there. So if you want to see all the field work I'm doing, the other profs are doing, like it on Instagram and Facebook, and you'll get plenty of info about the crayfish work, the snake work, the turtle work, all the work. And then finally, if you are in high school and you're considering an undergraduate degree, please consider zoo science at West Lib. If you are out of state, I was just recently informed of this. We are in West Virginia, guys. We are 49th in the country when it comes to income. So we are not an expensive university. So you can basically be out of state, and oftentimes our out of state rate is equal to or less than some of your in-state schools. So please give us a consideration there. And if you are a graduate, if you've already got your degree, you'd like to do herpetology or herpetoculture, by all means, consider reaching out to me. Just do it through social media. I think 3 of the 5 new grad students, that's how they found me. And I'm onboarding a guy in the fall who 100% CCR. Really happy about that, and I can't wait to get him onboarded because that's going to be fantastic. And Iowa updates, all kinds of stuff. So be it morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever time of day it is, I hope you're having a good one. And thank you, Dr. Whitman. This was fantastic. And yeah, see ya.